In today's video, we're diving into the recent buzz surrounding electric vehicles, EVs. From China and the European Union's EU investigation into how state subsidies affect their pricing. The reason for the investigation. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen recently dropped a bombshell by launching an investigation into Chinese EV imports. This move's raised eyebrows, and some folks are even calling it the starting point of a potential trade war. Think back to that time when the EU and Beijing had a showdown over solar panels about a decade ago. Well, this could be even bigger. In her annual State of the Union address, von der Leyen expressed her concern about the flood of Chinese electric cars hitting global markets. She pointed out that these cars come with price tags that seem too good to be true, thanks to hefty state subsidies. According to her, this is messing with the European market and distorting fair competition. This investigation was first brought up by French officials, and they're pretty happy about it. French Economy Minister Bruno Le Maire, for instance, welcomed the move with open arms. And he's not alone. German Economy Minister Robert Habeck also gave it a thumbs up. They claim that they're not trying to keep those high-performance, affordable Chinese cars out, but rather they're concerned about hidden subsidies that might be giving Chinese car makers an unfair edge. But that might not be true. It feels more like there's something sinister and unfair about the whole investigation. The truth is that China's made massive investments and become the big cheese in the battery technology that powers these clean EVs. Electric vehicle sales are expected to skyrocket, with over 14 million units worth a staggering $560 billion projected to be sold in 2023 alone. The EU's worried that without a level playing field, their own EV industry might lose out big time. China already controls a whopping 60% of global battery production. The EU's concerned that without some countermeasures, Chinese companies could completely dominate the EV markets, just when the Western world's about to go all in phasing out those traditional gas guzzlers. Now, across the pond in the United States, there's a similar conversation going on. The White House is grappling with the idea of making sure that Chinese technology doesn't get a massive subsidy boost to kickstart their EV industry. Even big names like Ford are in the mix, as they license battery tech from China's CATL, the biggest cell maker in the world with 2 plants in Europe. Collateral Damages. The funny thing is that this anti-subsidy investigation isn't just targeting Chinese brands. It's also looking at non-Chinese brands that are manufactured in China, like Tesla, Renault, and BMW. The investigation comes hot on the heels of the IAA Mobility 2023 conference in Munich, where Chinese EV companies made quite the entrance. From giants like BYD to nimble startups like XPeng, they were all there, doubling their presence from last year. In fact, about 41% of the event's presenters hailed from Asia. European automakers, feeling the pressure, rushed to showcase their own lower-cost, high-tech EVs to keep up with their Asian rivals. While Chinese automakers don't currently have a massive market share in Europe, that could change in a flash as they expand beyond China's borders. With consumer demand slowing down at home and Tesla shaking things up with competitive pricing, Chinese EV makers are feeling the urge to conquer overseas markets. In August, China's auto exports shot up by a whopping 31%, and their slice of the EV pie in the EU is growing too. These Chinese EVs are about 20% cheaper on average compared to EU-made models, and they're now making up 8% of the EU EV market. The European Commission even predicts this could soar to 15% by 2025. And the proof is in the pudding, or in this case, the announcements. XPeng, for instance, announced at the IAA that they're bringing their premium SUV, the G6, to Europe next year. BYD showcased a new lineup of cars tailored for the European market, and NIO's gearing up to launch a fresh brand of vehicles for Europe by 2024, all made in a brand new factory back in China. Also, alongside the investigation, the European Commission's considering slapping some hefty tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, to protect their own automakers, all because of the claim that these Chinese EVs are enjoying a helping hand from state subsidies. Now, the standard import tariff rate for cars in the EU is 10%, and the Commission's mulling over the possibility of slapping even higher tariffs over the next 13 months. That's where things could get spicy, potentially sparking a trade war with China. China's reaction. Now, let's not forget the Chinese Chamber of Commerce to the EU isn't thrilled about this investigation. They're saying China's competitive edge isn't just about subsidies, and they're calling for a fair and objective look at Chinese EVs. the China Chamber of Commerce to the EU did take to X, formerly Twitter, to express some strong concern and opposition to this probe. And fun fact, Wang Lutong, head of the Europe department at the Chinese Foreign Ministry, gave it a virtual thumbs down by retweeting that post. Implication for the Chinese EV market. This investigation and the proposed tariffs could have serious implications for the Chinese EV makers in Europe. First off, let's talk numbers. The investigation's casting a shadow on the annual exports of more than 2 million battery-powered vehicles projected to hit the European continent by 2030. That's a massive chunk of the market that could be affected. But here's the kicker. If the EU decides to impose tariffs higher than the standard 10%, which is the current rate for Chinese-made electric cars in the European Union, EU, it might just kick off a retaliatory battle. Beijing could hit back with measures to limit imports of European-made vehicles. It's like a game of trade chess. Now, check this out. Swiss bank UBS predicts that Chinese-made cars could dominate 33% of the global market by 2030, up from 17% last year. That's a huge leap, boosted by rising electric car sales. By 2030, Chinese car makers are expected to grab a 20% market share in Europe, which is about 2 million units. Most of the vehicles sold in Europe will run on batteries. But don't hit the panic button just yet. Some analysts say that this investigation might not dent Chinese EV exports in the short term. Looking ahead, Chinese EV makers might start exploring other countries and regions to diversify their exports. Plus, domestic demand in China is expected to keep rising as car prices fall with developing industrial chains and technical innovations. Chinese-made EVs are already about 20% cheaper on average compared to their EU-manufactured counterparts. Is China actually guilty of any crime? Okay, let's address the big question first. Who's doing the so-called dumping in the electric vehicle EV market? Well, here's the twist. It's not entirely clear if Chinese car makers are flooding the market with cheap cars, at least not right now. Matthias Schmidt, an independent automotive analyst, has an interesting take on this. He suggests that Chinese car makers might actually be selling their vehicles at a profit in places like Europe. How? Well, they're pricing their cars higher here than what they offer back in China, even after accounting for tariffs and shipping costs. Schmidt also points out that European car makers like Volkswagen, VW, might be playing their own pricing games. He mentions that VW's electric passenger car, the ID.3, is being offered at a much lower price in China compared to its European counterpart. So it's not all one-sided. Now let's talk about the official investigation. Once the European Commission kicks off its anti-subsidy probe, it's on the Trade Department to prove that China's indeed subsidizing companies that export electric vehicles to the EU, and they need to show that this is causing harm to the European EV industry. But here's the tricky part. As a trade lawyer points out, gathering enough evidence for such a case won't be a cakewalk. The European Commission often takes a political approach to these investigations, meaning things can get quite heated with lots of lobbying involved. What we think. The EU's investigation has sent shockwaves through the industry. They're looking into how Chinese EV makers benefit from state subsidies, and that's a reasonable question to ask. But what's raising eyebrows is the scale and the timing of this move. Chinese EV companies have been making significant strides in the global EV market, and some believe this investigation might be an attempt to slow down their meteoric rise. It's almost as if there's a fear that these Chinese companies are getting a bit too close for comfort. Now, let's dive into why this investigation may seem unfair. First, there's the sheer magnitude of the potential impact. We're talking about annual exports of over 2 million battery-powered vehicles projected for Europe by 2030. That's a game changer, and some argue that this investigation could throw a wrench into the gears of progress. But the real question here is about fairness. The investigation hints at the possibility of imposing tariffs higher than the standard 10% rate for Chinese-made electric cars in the European Union, EU. That's not just a hurdle, that's a mountain for Chinese EV makers to climb. And let's not forget the retaliation factor. If the EU goes down this road, Beijing might not just stand by and watch. They could decide to respond with measures that affect European-made vehicles, creating a full-fledged trade showdown. Here's another angle. Some experts believe that this move by the EU could stifle competition and slow down the EV industry's growth. It might not be about protecting the environment or fostering innovation. It could be more about protecting domestic interests. Swiss bank UBS predicts that Chinese-made cars could capture a whopping 33% of the global market by 2030. That's a substantial slice of the pie, but with this investigation looming, there's a question of whether these ambitions might be clipped. Other analysts suggest that the investigation might not impact Chinese EV exports in the short term. However, the long-term picture could be different. They foresee Chinese EV makers diversifying their exports to other countries and regions. This could potentially shift the global landscape, with Europe missing out on the next big thing in the automotive world. It's worth mentioning that Chinese-made EVs are already about 20% cheaper than their EU-manufactured counterparts, so the competition's fierce, and some might argue that this investigation's an attempt to level the playing field in favor of EU automakers. But here's the thing, the EV market's all about innovation and competitiveness. Stifling competition could slow down progress in terms of technology and affordability, and that's something we all want to avoid. In the end, this investigation raises important questions about fairness, competition, and the future of the EV industry. Is it a necessary step to ensure a level playing field, or is it a potential roadblock in the path to a greener future? Time will tell, but for now, it's clear that the world's watching closely as this electrifying drama unfolds. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and watch the next video.